So now that we have our square wired up and we're able to map new keys onto it using its own input state and getting the values of those keys from our input manager interpreting Unity's own input manager, we're able to keep everything nice and clean in our code. To illustrate how this is all decoupled, we're actually going to add a second player in and give it a try to remap the keys on the fly. In order to do this, let's duplicate the quad and move it over a little bit. Now, the quad's going to have its own input state and its own simple movement script. And we don't need to change anything on here. It's still going to be mapped to the right and the left key. What we want to do on the input manager, however, is copy the existing input manager and paste a new one as new. Now, we'll need a reference to the new quad for this input manager. So let's drag that over. You'll note that the first one is referenced to quad, and the second one is referenced to quad 1. Now what we'll need to do is change these two inputs so that we're looking at different axes. In this case, we're simply going to map them over to Fire 1 and Fire 2. Let's change right to Fire 2, and let's change left to Fire 1. The other thing that we're going to need to do is that since Fire represents a button, there's only one value, which is going to be 1. So we're going to want to make this greater than 0, but we'll still leave the mapping as is. We'll save our scene, and we'll run the game. Now, you can move left and right for one, and you can use Control and Option to move the other one. What's great about this is that at any point, if you go into the project settings and go back into the input, you can add any axis you want here and then simply remap them. So if you want to have multiplayer in your game, you can continue to add your own axes and go into the input manager and simply remap them here. You can have an infinite number of input managers as long as each individual input manager looks at its own input state. The last thing we're going to want to do is just clean up our input state before we move on. Let's open up this class, and we're going to remove our debug code. The last thing we want to do is go into the input manager, and let's add in the mappings for the other keys that we're going to need throughout our game. We're going to want to add up, down, A, and B. Now, we're ready to move on to actually building a real player that would go in a game. And from there, we'll connect up animations and everything else we need to make this player come to life.